It seems clear that there will be some early agenda items on President-elect Joe Biden's desk by way of executive orders, in some cases reversing moves made by outgoing President Trump. But one of the things, of course, that's been leaked that is causing great consternation on this side of the border is the idea that Keystone will be once and for all blocked by this administration, something that had been signaled heavily, but it may also be part of a broader change in environmental regulations that Canada should be wise to. Mark Wiseman is with us now. He is chair of AIMco and former CEO of CPPIB. Mark, great to have you with us. And I did want to start there. I mean, Keystone's obviously getting a lot of attention, and you know, as it will for the people with a direct vested interest. More broadly, what do you think Canada needs to be considering when it comes to this administration's environmental policies as we understand them so far?
Well, thanks, Amanda, and great to be back with you on BNN. Look, I think that Keystone is part of a bigger picture for the new administration in the U.S. And what is very clear and what has been clearly signaled is that climate change and the environment in general is going to be central to the Biden administration's economic policy. You can see that in some of the appointments he's made. People like Brian Deese, who was part of the Obama administration's negotiating team for the Paris Accord, taking on the key economic role in the administration. Other folks like Wally Adeyemo at Treasury, again, both of whom work with no opportunity. But this is a massive shift, and I think investors have to be ready for it.
So, how best should we be ready for it, Mark? I mean, obviously, you know, we've seen our energy sector take a massive hit. The price of oil didn't help through this pandemic, but we've seen, you know, big company after big company change their long-term plan, write down the value of assets. It feels like a real pivot point for big oil and energy in Canada. How do we take advantage of that? It feels just like there's only one side of the ledger and it's all bad.
Well, I'm a little bit more optimistic on that than maybe you are, Amanda. I think, first of all, you know, Canadian natural resources and Canadian energy is still going to be incredibly important. And, you know, regardless of what happens with Keystone, Canadian energy has to play a very important role overall in North America. And, you know, one thing to keep in mind is the U.S. Today in 2021 is no longer self-sufficient in energy. And so if they want security of supply, Canada, with or without Keystone, is going to have to play an important role in that. But longer term and bigger picture, the real opportunity is in transition. And I really believe that this may be the investment opportunity of a generation. And I believe Canadian investors, Canadian banks, Canadian pension plans can play an incredibly important role in leading what is now being described as transition finance as we move to a net zero world in 2030, 2040, 2050 and beyond. We are going to have to finance that change. Canadian corporations have an opportunity to be at the forefront of that change. And I think we should view it not as something that we have to be defensive about, but actually how are we going to play offense? How are we going to lead in terms of transition finance? How are Canadian corporations going to lead in the transition to a net zero world? And I think Canadians can do that. I think Canadian corporations, including Canadian energy producers, are going to be able to do that. And some of the things we're talking about in Alberta around carbon capture, I think we can be world leaders.
Are you a believer in the hydrogen plan being advanced by the federal government? It's one piece of the puzzle, but do you think that's a valuable one?
I think it is an important. I think it is an important piece of the puzzle. You know, we don't know which technologies are going to emerge as winners. I think it's a little bit like the vaccine approach. We have to place our bets on a number of options. But again, if we are forward thinking about it, looking ahead and not backwards, and really understanding how big a change the Biden administration is going to mean in this regard, I think we're going to see a massive acceleration, particularly in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, to a move to climate finance, to a move to green energy, and to a move towards a much more aggressive policy transition and economic transition to net zero. And so I think hydrogen is one of the things that will in all likelihood, play a very important role in that.
In Canada, we also have a government that's promising to spend up to 3.5% of GDP on new stimulus. So beyond the pandemic, new growth targeted spending. Do you have thoughts about the best application of that level of spending?
Well, we've talked about this before, Amanda, and I think, we're now hopefully coming towards the end of what I think about as the pandemic or the COVID economy. And we very, very quickly have to think about how Canada is going to transition to the post-COVID economy. We've had a tremendous amount of government spending over the last 9 months. That is going to continue, and we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it. The only way that we are going to pay for it is by having a clear, cogent, and very focused growth plan. Every dollar that we spend has to be used to stimulate growth in our economy. We have to take Canadian pre-COVID sort of GDP run rate of about 2% to something closer to 3% going forward if we want to be able to pay back and refill the hole that we've created for future generations of Canadians. Now, I don't disagree with the fact that we had to create that hole, but we better be very focused on how we fill it going forward, and that can only be filled through economic growth. What do we need to do? We need a clear plan on energy transition, and we need to invest in that. We need a clear plan on national infrastructure. And by the way, the new administration in the U.S. is going to be very, very helpful in that regard, because a lot of that infrastructure is going to be cross-border and will have to be cross-border given how integrated the two economies are. We need a plan that will see innovation and allow entrepreneurs in this country to flourish. That's what's going to create jobs going forward. And ultimately, we need a plan, I believe, around getting more Canadians into the workforce by using things like a national child care plan to allow higher workforce participation. So everything has to be coordinated towards a growth agenda. And we cannot waste a dollar in that regard, frankly, because we can't afford to.
Mark Wiseman, great to have your thoughts. Appreciate it. Mark Wiseman is chair of AIMco, former CEO of CPP IB.